It isn't an understatement to claim that Team Silent's bid into the survival horror genre was a groundbreaking occasion, incorporating various ideas from both mainstream horror, such as the usage of tank controls left over from Resident Evil, and indie entries in Jacob's Ladder, a huge inspiration for the project from both a conceptual and written point. There's a reason why it is fondly looked back on. Why the first 4 games plus Shattered Memories are tucked away in a lot of people's vaunted halls as exemplary works in the game industry. Why today people look at Konami with outright disdain, knowing that the legacy of Silent Hill will be forever locked in a tomb until stated otherwise. But unlike the various, excuse my rude comment, rubes, I put these people wishing for another Silent Hill project in the same category as those Mother 3 fans who still ache for an official release when it's playable right now. Companies aren't your friend. I don't give myself black hope. Silent Hill as a series is deader than Alex's kid brother. The only way the Forsaken Town will come back is by being filed under different management, but if the NFT fad is anything to go by, Konami is more than willing to whore out its franchises to everyone besides passionate designers that want to take a crack at it. No, I'm not looking forward to whatever may be with the rumors, as I can't trust Konami and neither should you. Not wanting to get too indignant with my fury over the shitty practices of corporatism and its suffocating attachment to games in this section, as we've only started the video. Fad is one letter away from fade. Let's continue over in history. Why I specified Team Silent at the start is solely because Konami slapdashed a group together completely made up of developers, artists, modelers, and a composer for games that never saw the light of day. In short, a cast of misfits destined to fail. Had failed. To say that there was a rift between the corporate-focused Konami, this is an organization that based this newest project only on the idea of selling to the West, possibly due to Resident Evil's overt success as a B-movie horror romp, and Team Silent, who were structured under strict limitations to the point that the crew felt like the black sheep of their organization, as posited by Brittany Vincent on Shack News, isn't the full picture. Development started within the year of 1996, Kichiro Toyama appointed as director for unknown reasons. A tweet asking for clarification was met with a response of, "I don't know why Konami appointed me to the director. Because I was a creepy person?" Indeed, Toyama's previous work lacked notable qualifications. He only had 2 games under his belt, Snatcher, incidentally making this funny as Kojima had an existing relationship with Silent Hill before PT, and International Track and Field. His credits for both were for design. Diving even further, Toyama explains to Polygon that around the time of Silent Hill's development, I had just about wrapped up my training period as a designer when the company decided to form a team with younger company staffers. This was right during the shift to 3D. Things went really fast after that. I wound up having my choice of a few different concept documents, and we ended up working on Silent Hill. On Toyama's plate now was a heavier load, not only acting as the visionary lead for the Slapshot bunch, but having to write this new project's plot. Oh yeah, Toyama didn't have a knack for horror, or more specifically, the splatter type. Much like anything, horror can be categorized down, and through my channel alone have you seen the various subsets. Saya and Resident Evil are classified under body horror, though the former has the psychological and cosmic modifiers that World of Horror has. Illbleed is campy monster mash, which Resident Evil embodies without the camp factor, as does Obscure, which ties itself with the infection genre, while Condemned has cult leanings mixed in with splatter like Manhunt. There are others I'm foregoing for the sake of brevity, as this segment could be long in the tooth like an ornery crocodile. Danger, crocodile. But just have you know that horror is as wide or narrow as you want to make it. Constructing the case for Toyama, he jokes to Polygon with, "I was really kind of a scaredy cat." I never liked the really bloody shockfest sort of horror film, so I was kind of at a loss when we started out. What I am a fan of is occult stuff and UFO stories and so on, that, and I'd watched a lot of David Lynch films, so it was really a matter of me taking what was on my shelves and taking the more horror-oriented aspects of what I found. So I really don't think Silent Hill was that much of a horror game, and it was kind of a surprise to me when people told me it was scary after it came out. To best describe David Lynch's work, unnervingly quirky? Unsettling surreal? Emotionally raw?
Fucking bullshit.
He has a knack for psychological and emotional fear, Eraserhead tapping into unplanned parenthood and the turmoil of lacking caregivers, while the Elephant Man a play on identity.
past and present. And enemy 0. Are you watching? Can I voice?
Huh. Treading on ground we've already walked across, seeing as JJ was rife with Mr. Lynch's creative decisions, but this is where Toyama's inexperience shines through, requiring the editorial hand of Takayoshi Saito. Hired as a 3D artist, Saito alongside Akira Yamaoka and Masahiro Ito might as well have been the backbone of the team. Dipping into Silent Hill 2 for a bit, Toyama would not return as director for the sequel, citing that I felt like I had taken the director job a little too quickly and I had lost some of my confidence in the process. We had a lot of talented people on the staff like creature designer Masahiro Ito, cutscene director Takayoshi Saito, and musician and later series producer Akira Yamaoka, and to some extent, I felt like my design work was more getting in the way of their talents than anything else. So I moved to SCE with the intention of relearning my job from the ground up within the Polygon interview. Tangentially ironic as he came up with the Siren series and the Gravity Rush duology at his time with SCE/SIE. That's a golden recommendation from me if you're wondering. Out of the whole crowd, it's Takayoshi Saito I feel the most sympathy for. As a part of the new breed, or new blood if you like wrestling references that didn't make it past the year 2000, Saito was belittled by the old guard at Konami. While I usually make callouts to interviews and other material within my videos, providing the links in the description for your own reading, I highly recommend you read the Game Sutra article covering Saito's journey. By pure chance did Saito sign on with Konami, receiving a flyer that stressed that the company was bringing on artists. Having a background in art, studying at the Tama Art University at Tokyo, and earning a bachelor's in oil painting, Saito landed the gig after a rigorous set of interviews, his first job connected to Sexy Parodius's port, where he got to sharpen his teeth with the mounting 3D movement. Borrowing the man's own words to describe his time learning 3D at Konami, there was no choice but to do it there. The porting of Sexy Parodius was hell. I was the only artist in the team and had to work 15 hours, 7 days a week, and that's hell. It was a 2D game, and 2D was on the verge of extinction at the time, 1996. So I was pretty worried, being that I was so busy and working so hard, but in a few years, I'd basically be skillless and laid off. So I started learning that 3D package after midnight every day on my own. In the span of a torturous 5 months, Saito had taught himself the ins and outs of 3D modeling. For the record, he was one of the only people at Konami who knew how to work with the 3D engine, and thus he clamored to labor on a project that centered on it. A monkey's paw crawled. Saito explained in Game Sutra that, at first, the work they gave me was much more basic, like making letters for subtitles or UI for presentations and scheduling and sorting files. That sort of job. It was hard. And there were artists that were older than me but didn't have any knowledge of 3D, but in Japanese society, older people get more respect within the company, so I had to teach them while doing this work. So basically, I was doing demos and presentations in 3D and not getting credit. I thought that was unfair, but I was paying my dues. I do not have to say how fucked that is, particularly on the no credit half and paying dues half. For as much as I rag on Western developers and publishers for inhuman treatment, the East has their own problems as well. At least Saito knew how unfair his treatment was, holding himself hostage to twist Konami's arm. So I decided to compose my own 4-second piece of a movie and then presented it. I kind of stepped over my boss and showed the higher-ups, saying, "This is what I can do. Let me do some real 3D work, otherwise I won't teach anyone else." So that's how I started gradually getting 3D work, like rigging, lighting, and atmosphere, character design, and other things on the visual pipeline. More than 8 months later, we had a chance to show our movies and in-game stuff at E3, and at that point, I got applause, Saito tells Game Sutra. But sneaky Konami still wanted to go behind his back, placing a supervisor above Saito. For possibly the longest quote I've used for this series, Saito gives the rundown of his work for Silent Hill as such. People liked the content and visuals, but I still wasn't in charge of cinematics or characters or anything. Well, even though I was actually in charge of it, my title still didn't reflect that, and my boss wanted to find someone above me to give me direction, because in Japanese companies, they don't want to credit someone like me who's the youngest in the team. He wanted to give me a CGI and visual supervisor, but that was kind of strange because I had all the pipeline and 30 or 40% of all movie sequences done. Why should I have a supervisor for that? So I said I don't need anybody above me, and a fight started during which my boss said, "Fine then, can you finish everything on your own?" And I had to say, "Okay, I will." That's why I had to do everything. Not many people believe that I did it myself, and it wasn't like I wanted to make it all from scratch. I just had to do it in order to get credit. Plus, you don't want to be credited in your game as an assistant artist if you did everything, so it wasn't easy. I didn't go home for 3 years almost. I lived there. I slept under the desk, and that midnight time I talked about after everyone went home was a real chance for me to work, because I had access to all of the computers in the office. We had over 150 computers or something like that, and at the time we were using the Unix operating system. So after everyone's gone home, I can operate on all these computers to render my stuff. Yeah, I couldn't go home. Without Saito, there wouldn't have been Silent Hill. Speaking of, the title is more than that, referring to the location, a small tourist town in Maine where the game would take place. Adding more layers to his work than there already were, Saito had no real-life references for Caucasians. In another interview that I suggest you read, Saito tells Core Gamer that, "I do not remember huge challenges except tons of technical challenges. However, I put extra care to create signatures for each character. For example, the signature for Dahlia is a weathered neck that streaks of slacking skin goes from clavicle to jaw." That was very difficult to do at that time, by the way, and that kind of things. Also, another challenge was that even though all characters are Caucasians, I really had no Caucasians around me as a reference. I had a hard time to resume skull shape. Japan is almost single racial nation. It is in this self-same interview that creature design is brought up. Though not the chosen designer, Saito does describe the mythos surrounding Silent Hill's horror as, "I do not think human would feel fear by seeing monster with things, horns, and such typical scary visual language. I think there are two main factors that evoke fear. First, to see something beyond their understanding. Second, to see concealed their true self." Despite being lauded as the visual face of Silent Hill in the creature department, Masahiro Ito's role for this first outing wasn't as significant as it would be. Explaining to Silent Hill Paradise in a brief interview, Ito tells the website that, "I came up with designs myself, but a few of the monsters in his first Silent Hill, Kiichiro Toyama, he requested me to design those monsters which he imaged like Child and Incubus. I didn't design all the monsters in the first Silent Hill in the first place. Naoko Saito and Kiichiro Toyama, they designed monsters in it too. Because of this, there's not a lot of information to pull from, as it isn't like I can hop onto his Twitter. He is one of the only English-speaking members of Team Silent, thus for 2 and 3, he did provide a bit of context for the monsters in later years." Rounding out the main trio, Akira Yamaoka is a man that needs no introduction. Out of the recurring cast for Silent Hill, he was the one that steadily became the face of the series with his harsh industrial soundscape and his haunting atmospheric OSTs. Going even further, the vocal tracks such as Room of Angel, You're Not Here, and Tender Sugar are just as good, encapsulating character identities and themes. Originally, though, he was not the one picked for the first game. Some unknown composer was, but when they left, Yamaoka stated to Spiel Music that even from the time of concept planning, I thought it was just myself who was capable of doing this project. I myself raised my hand first to get selected. Make no mistake, while I've dubbed him a composer, Yamaoka is more than just that. He was in the role of sound director. Like with Saito, Yamaoka thrust much of the responsibilities of the game onto himself, he describing the duty with, "In the title of Silent Hill, although it may seem strange or unrealistic to some, in actuality everything that is related to sound, such as sound creation, sound effect creation, call timing of sound, data creation, sound mastering, engineering, mixing, etc., I did all the work for. Most likely, I would say that 6 to 8 people would be needed in the overall sound department for a normal project, but no one really touched it besides me from the time of creation to when it went on the CD and DVD. And like with the other stalwart member, Akira had to fight for his creativity. Mistaking his oppressive atmosphere building for a game bug, Yamaoka had to inform the team that his choices were purposeful in making the town of Silent Hill the sinister locale. If I haven't made it clear, all these purposeful choices were to serve one goal: making Silent Hill stand the test of time. You're going to have to level with me here for a moment, as the source I'm recalling isn't one I can actually access, a Swedish book by the name of Morker Cindy? Reset Media AB? Pages 85 to 93 are referenced when speaking of why Silent Hill was the way that it was designed, so for sake of salt, both a grain and the slang, I'm gonna have to rely on Wikipedia. Through Sato, he told this book that the development team intended to make Silent Hill a masterpiece rather than a traditional sales-oriented game, and that they opted for an engaging story which would persist over time, similar to successful literature. From there, much of Silent Hill can be condensed as it ran the convention circuit, first appearing at E3 in 1998 to a huge pop, forcing Konami's hand into backing the game with a bigger budget for marketing and a demo hidden away in Metal Gear Solid. Released on the PlayStation, we got it first in February 1999, with Europe and Japan getting it later. Silent Hill 1 was of course re-released on the PlayStation Network and as part of the collection that is absolute dookie, as Konami misplaced the source code because, yeah. But that isn't the strangest happening with this first game. A Japanese exclusive visual novel retelling of Silent Hill 1 exists on the GBA titled Play Novel Silent Hill, a little oddity for those curious, especially since Sybil has her own route and there is a third DLC one back when DLC wasn't as common for console games. Because giving money to Konami is a cardinal sin, and the easiest way to play Silent Hill relies on me doing so with either the busted collection or the PlayStation 3 version that I'm pretty sure is just an emulated copy, I booted up EPSXE, seeing as that is the morally right thing to do. Our tale opens up with Harry Mason and his daughter Cheryl cruising the dark streets of somewhere, Maine, heading to a resort destination by the name of Silent Hill. While they are rolled up on by a cop, she pays them no mind and promptly crashes. Harry and Cheryl do the same, mostly because an apparition of a young woman decided to cross the street like the unfortunate chicken. Waking up after a long bout of unconsciousness, Harry finds himself in a fog-filled Silent Hill and down one daughter. Racing to find her, Harry thinks he sees Cheryl, but instead he gets sucked into a living nightmare where he ultimately dies, if not for the fact that he wakes back up in a cafe with the cop from earlier, Sybil Bennett. Apparently, strange goings-on have been happening in Silent Hill, requiring neighboring town Brahms to dispatch an officer. Since waiting at the cafe won't solve this issue or bring a daughter back, Harry and Sybil split up to search for clues, Harry returning to the alleyway to find out that Cheryl has potentially gone to Midwich Elementary for unexplained justifications. I say unexplained as when Harry arrives, he finds the school abandoned and gets sucked back into the terrifying otherworld to fight a monster. Defeating it, the visage of a young girl appears and a siren rings out, the announcement that a shift between worlds is happening, dumping Harry back into the fog-filled Silent Hill, or as I will call it now, the Fog World.
Huh? What was that? Who in the hell was that?
Up the creek without a paddle, it's only the ringing of a bell that guides Harry to a church and a run-in with Dahlia. Foretelling his arrival by gyromancy, she spouts some mumbo-jumbo religious hoo-ha before handing him the Flaros. While its role isn't explained to Harry, probably something to do with the incineration of humanity, Dahlia thinks he is the right person to have it and directs him to Alchemilla Hospital.
Told by gyromancy.
What are you talking about?
I knew you'd come. You want the girl, right?
The girl? You're talking about Cheryl.
I see everything.
You know something. Tell me.
Stay back. Nothing is to be gained from floundering about at random. You must follow the path. The path of the hermit concealed by Flauros.
What? What are you talking about?
Here, the Flauros, a cage of peace. It can break through the walls of darkness and counteract the wrath of the underworld. These will help you. Make haste to the hospital before it's too late.
Wait! Don't go yet.
There, Harry has run-ins with Dr. Kaufman in the Fog World and Lisa Garland in the Other World, two people who seemingly have a connection to this town if unknown at the moment. After conversing with Lisa, Harry wakes back up in the Fog World to Dahlia's ramblings concerning the runes all over Silent Hill, the mark of Samael, lacking religious context as the sometimes angel, sometimes devil's name translates to poison of God, thus meaning whatever Dahlia is wanting to accomplish is being hampered by these seals. Harry moseys over to the antique shop per Dahlia's request and reunites with Sybil, who tells him that she saw a girl walking out by the lake before being sucked back into the overworld in a dreamlike conversation with Lisa. The townsfolk of Silent Hill are an odd bunch, a number of them following an unusual religion that ultimately led to the deaths of some governmental bodies like the mayor and an increase in drug trafficking as a means to keep to tradition.
Oh yeah, that crazy Gillespie lady. She's kind of famous around here. She never sees anybody, so I don't know that much about her. But I heard her kid died in a fire, and supposedly she's been crazy ever since.
Well, she says the town is being devoured by the darkness. Do you have any idea what she's talking about?
The town devoured by the darkness. Yes, I think I do. Before this place was turned into a resort, the townspeople here were on the quiet side. Everybody followed some kind of queer religion. Weird occult stuff, black magic, that kind of thing. As young people moved away, the people figured they'd been summoned by the gods. Evidently, things like that used to happen around here all the time. Before the resort, there really wasn't anything else out here. Everyone was so flipped out, you gotta blame it on something. Then a lot of new people came in and everybody clammed up about it.
A cult?
Last time I heard anything about it was, gosh, years ago. When several people connected with developing the town died in accidents. People said it was a curse. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm rambling. I'll shut up.
The tourist nature of the town acts as a way for this cult to gather warm bodies, especially since the only people who push back against them are now pushing daisies. Awakening back in the antique shop, Harry rushes to the hospital to speak to Lisa, who tells him of a way to get to the lake. Reaching the resort district, Harry does some snooping around to save Kaufman and learn of his deeper machinations. He has ties to the drug trade within Silent Hill, but apparently wants to get out, hiding a vial of red liquid, which Harry scoops some up at the hospital, and a motorcycle that Harry finds.
Give me that.
What is this?
That's none of your business. Instead of messing with that, how about coming up with a way to get out of here? You shouldn't be hanging around here goofing off. What do you think you're doing? You want to get yourself killed? Get out of here.
Okay, take it easy.
Unless you want to die, keep your mind on business. Got it?
Finished with this detour, Harry regroups with Sybil and Dahlia in a boathouse. The last two seals located at the lighthouse and amusement park. Splitting off, Harry undoes the one at the lighthouse, but Sybil gets attacked at the park, forcing Harry to fight her as whoever her assailant was has infected Sybil with a parasite. Using the red liquid, Harry manages to snap Sybil out and tells her his life story. Cheryl was adopted by Harry and his dead wife when they found her on the side of a highway.
Sybil! Wake up! Snap out of it! Sybil!
Harry, what happened?
Shh, don't talk. I'll take care of you.
Harry, why did they take your daughter? Why her?
I'm not sure myself. But, you know, Cheryl isn't my biological daughter. I actually haven't told her yet. She probably already knows anyway, though. We found her abandoned on the side of the highway. Nobody knew where she came from. We didn't have any kids of our own. My wife was sick, and it didn't look like she was getting any better. So we took Cheryl in.
So in that case...
There might be some connection between Cheryl and this town.
So what do you do now?
Cheryl is my daughter. I will save her no matter what.
With all seals trampled upon, Harry confronts the mysterious woman, named Alessa as her photo was at the hospital, who has appeared at each of the locations he's visited. Though she tries to fight back, the Flaros cages Alessa, allowing Dahlia to gloat to Harry. Waking up only in nowhere, Harry uncovers the truth of Silent Hill. Alessa, the daughter of Dahlia, was a vessel meant for the Order's god. Lighting her daughter on fire, Dahlia tried to birth this entity, but thinking quickly, Alessa separated her spirit into two, with Cheryl being born. The woman seen at the beginning of the game was Alessa's astral projection, wanting to call Cheryl back so that she could close off God and Silent Hill from our reality. However, Dahlia tricked Harry into reuniting the two souls and disrupting the seal of Metatron, the actual name of the runes.
Everything is going according to plan, sheltered in the womb.
But it's not done yet. Half the soul is lost. That is why the seed lies dormant.
And what soul remains captured in that husk is buried deep down in the subconscious.
Are you trying to say it won't work? That wasn't our agreement.
No, these are just stalling tactics. If we lend a hand, we will be able to get power. Never fear, the promise shall not be broken.
But the power we could draw now will be very weak. Almost nothing. Unless we get the other half of the soul.
will use a magical spell. Feeling this child's pain, it's sure to come.
But that will take time.
With the birth of God nigh, it's Kaufman who saves the day by throwing the vial of Aglaophatus at the merged incubator, releasing the incubus that slaughters Dahlia and is in turn gunned down by Harry. Our story ends with Harry, Sybil, and a reincarnated baby Cheryl leaving the crumbling otherworld, hopefully safe from the evil desires of the Order. I will preface this analysis by acknowledging the bad ending. Going forward, Silent Hill adopts Harry's daughter Heather for the third outing, confirming that he didn't die over the course of his adventure. Choosing not to rescue Kaufman and Sybil instead leaves Harry waking up in his Jeep after defeating the final boss, the entirety of Silent Hill a dying dream. Now you know, though everyone else before me has pointed this out, why Jacob's Ladder is usually brought up in reference to Silent Hill. With that out of the way, it's time for me to talk about context, as if and when I do decide to cover the rest of the original quadrilogy, the framing of each story is important. Silent Hill 1 and 3 are interwoven with the cult storyline, emphasizing the titular town and the people within it. As such, Harry and Heather Mason's angst comes from the external evils, Dahlia and Claudia's machinations to revive the Order's god. 2 and 4, meanwhile, switch focus to an internal struggle, the headlining stars James Sunderland and Walter Sullivan suffering more from within, though I will double back by saying much of what Walter went through has a starting point connected to the Order. With the roadmap laid out, Silent Hill's original plotline is simple in many regards. It's not as esoteric as the later sequels would be. At the center, this is a somewhat basic story about rescuing a lost daughter that devolves into conspiracy and religious insanity. Make no mistake, Harry out of the whole cast is purposefully bland. His normality clashes against the lunacy he's adopted into. There's a literally missing from that sentence. Unwittingly, the girl that Harry took in as his own was half the spirit of Alessa. Cheryl could be seen as a last grasp of normalcy for the Gillespies, since this version of Silent Hill represents all the tortures Alessa went through. This has always been a critical aspect of Silent Hill, the symbolism. While not too obtuse, as there are obvious threads that can be followed, the grey children and zombie hospital workers on the nose, some monsters and concepts are a bit more figurative. Take the twin feeler and the float stinger. Shorthand, larvae and butterflies / moths are the circle of life. They grow and then mature to spring forth into life as an adult. By placing Alessa in that role, do we make a connection to her status as the incubator? She's the cocoon for God, or in this case, the incubus. On a more metaphorical level, butterflies and moths are symbols of rebirth in Native American culture, which is what the Order wants for the world, and ties back into how blended the religion of Silent Hill actually is. And to continue with this point, for rebirth to happen, death must first occur, and we know that the incubus is fully capable of that. Speaking of Baphomet, that's some visual play as well. With all her fire and brimstone, Dahlia, or Alessa, as she may have had a hand in this too due to her trauma, has twisted a supposed sacred figure into its exact opposite. Ironically, this fits way more for the god of the Order than the incubator, which appears more like an adult Alessa and God in any media that she is represented by. To the rest of the world, God is more in line with Devil, while the members of the Order look past its profane visage. I mean, it is hard to act against a cult when they run the whole town. Perhaps my favorite aspect that Silent Hill goes into is how the Order operates, as their modus operandi is somewhat grounded. By taking advantage of the tourist nature of Silent Hill, plus the local drug trade, can they enforce their will. Why so many people come to the town in the first place could even be hinted that it's because of the drug PTV, the main source of income for a lot of shady figures within Silent Hill, the Order included. Coincidentally, the main attraction for the town, its destination as a tourist trap, was drying up, so it can be assumed for amount of time that the local government let the Order slide with their bollocks. They're bringing people to a remote village that is surely dwindling off into nothing. Then the current mayor decided to fight back, leading to a formal investigation that ran cold because of a series of assassinations from the Order, so that their stranglehold on Silent Hill would go unchallenged. It was never about the town in the first place. Silent Hill's a means to an end. Incidentally, that explains both the fog and Otherworld. The scars of the area plus a person's mental anguish are coming too. I have to include that odd admittance, as what dictates a person's journey can be both extrinsic and intrinsic. Since Alessa is damn near calling Harry to reconvene with her so that she may be whole again, Alessa is projecting herself onto Silent Hill. Explained before, that's why many of the monsters are essentially adapted from horrible moments within her life. The overt religious dogma, the general fear of outsiders, that sort of stuff. Harry, as a character, has little to fear as the town isn't personally attacking him. This isn't a confrontation with guilt. As such, it can be seen that the fog world is basically a terminal or a train station. It is the world that Alessa suffered in, but specific areas pull to the surface more acute ordeals. Thus, the other world takes over to manifest what Alessa dealt with in said sites. The only time this specifier doesn't hold weight is when Silent Hill is legitimately crumbling. I take that more as Alessa losing full control and shuttering off the fog world in favor of the otherworld, as it best portrays the malignant core festering within the town. Again, all this theorizing on this version of Silent Hill is a bit tricky, as later entries would add or remove certain proclivities from the town itself. Like, beginning with 2, Silent Hill doesn't present monsters the same to others, if at all, since Laura never encounters any creatures. 3 would keep that notion, while 4 goes back to 1's mentality. The only uniting factor is that the unwell are preyed upon, though whether this is purposeful by conspiring forces or incidental is left for you to decide. Personally, I place blame at the Order, and take Silent Hill as more or less a casualty to their mysticism. I buy what they practice as real, the fog and otherworld ideas they tapped into through their practices, not because Silent Hill is this ley line of oddities. Think about my viewing this way. Silent Hill 1 is more on the dangers of occultism, bad parenting, and how organized religion can affect the world negatively. That can happen anywhere, thus drawing the horror away from spooky scary town to spooky scary people in reality. Which in hindsight has kinda always been the horror flavoring of Silent Hill, the darkness within people, organizations, and so forth and so on. Guess Homecoming and Downpour held themselves to that regard, but that's neither here nor there. Before I go into my usual diatribes about the presentation, may I play the opening of the game? Wait a second, this is my show, so here's the opening of the game in full. Now, I didn't show it off to increase my runtime, contrary to popular belief. I mean, we've already gone over 10 minutes, so there's no tricking the algorithm reason for my doing this. Instead, I want to proclaim that the opening of Silent Hill 1, and this applies to the rest of the original quadrilogy, is the best way to introduce your game to a new audience. It feels weird that I'm not covering the game straight away, but that is how captivating the opening is, and how it speaks of Silent Hill's ability to blend multiple parts of the presentation together to create an unforgettable visual and auditory experience. Despite how the FMV has aged since the release of the game, to me it takes on this perfect uncanny vibe, settling you into the horror even before you get into Silent Hill proper. The shots of Dahlia are the ones that always stay with me because damn, back then they already made her creepy and she just gets better and better with age, but even with the other characters, while still looking off as that's how FMV ages, you get the sense that they're regular people shoved right into the bowels of hell, yet this opening wouldn't land as hard as it did without the title track blaring in the background. A simple montage of moments from the game, as well as the car crash leading up to the first few seconds of gameplay, becomes this eerie foreboding of events yet to come, and then the game finally begins and it looks like this. Consolely speaking, this was mind-blowing at the time. Resident Evil, this won't be the last time I bring this franchise up by the way, used a blend of 3D models and FMV backgrounds as full 3D renders were difficult to use. Silent Hill says hold my beer and throws caution to the wind, investing heavily into the world by making it an expansive, completely modeled location. The fact that Silent Hill doesn't fry out the memory of the PlayStation, as this was a console that had issues regarding memory, see the ports of the Marvel games, is a miracle, but there were other choices that Team Silent indulged to mask the PlayStation's limitations. Say it all with me now, the fog.
Cheryl? Is that Cheryl? Where are you going? Hey, wait! Stop!
In a lesser game, Superman 64, the fog would be this distracting aberration that detracts from the adventure at large. Here, with the setting in a creepy town, the fog amplifies the horror while saving the PlayStation from catching fire. This isn't always perfect, however, as when in the Otherworld version of the Silent Hill hubs, you can spot noticeable pop-in. It's not too distracting as literally everything else makes up for it. While Silent Hill itself hits the creepy northwestern town vibe that Stephen King bathes in, the Otherworld is where it's at. Call me a sucker for meat moss and intrinsically horrific scenery, but I love being shuffled off into the Otherworld. It hits a hard mixture of decay and blasphemy that hints to the darker nature of Dahlia and the cult infecting Silent Hill. Why else would there be strung up bodies ripped up in the kinds of sacrilegious rituals better left unseen? And that wherein lies the beauty of Silent Hill sound design and music. It always leaves you on your toes. There are a multitude of rooms in Silent Hill that I refuse to stay in for longer than a few seconds because of how overwhelming Akira Yamaoka's decisions were. At times, it feels as if the game itself wants to pop your eardrums or serenade you with the most uncomfortable noises you've ever heard. And this isn't just limited to the music. Anything in the game can catch you off guard. There is one room in Alchemilla dedicated to the sounds of broken glass. Why? Who knows why, but it sure is freaky. On the other hand, Silent Hill can be deathly quiet, ratcheting up your paranoia to the point that any sound can make you jumpy. While preferring to drown you in overwhelming terror, Silent Hill is effective in earned jump scares, particularly within the sewer. Perhaps an underrated part of the presentation is the voice acting. Despite one name, Jerrion Monroe, as Kaufman, most of the people chosen for the game were up-and-comers, people who had less than 10 roles to their names, and yet, next to Max Payne, Silent Hill is one of the best casts in a video game solely based on direction. Thank Michael Guin, uncredited VA director and voice of Harry, as he got the memo. What makes the characters of Silent Hill come to life is how plain they are. There's no over-the-top acting besides from Liz Momorsky's Dahlia, which fits her character. Harry comes across as a workaday average guy only looking for his daughter. In spite of never getting a clearer picture than that, as Harry wouldn't get more characterization until 3, Michael Guin gives our man of the hour a determination that can be felt. It's easy to get behind Harry. And while we don't get a lot of scenes with the other characters, Thessaly Leonard provides Lisa with a nervous energy foreshadowing the pain that she has suffered from, while Susan Papa's Sybil's stern but fair attitude acts as a rock against all the craziness the town throws at Harry. Guess this leaves me with the models and animations, which are probably the least interesting part about the presentation, not because they are bog standard, but because they are of equally high quality. There isn't much to talk about here as you can use your eyes. Back then, this wasn't the norm, so having Harry animate in particular ways, such as when he falls from a set of stairs, wasn't common back then. Yes, age has played a part with Silent Hill, but the general atmosphere the game is going for makes it stand the test of time, just like what Team Silent wanted. Silent Hill is a fully 3D survival horror pseudo-open world game. More on that later as Yorokobo Shonen. Difficulty select has finally returned to... Oh, it's only been one video. Might be. Difficulty is surprisingly neutered in Silent Hill. My stating of that is because later games in the franchise would have 2 sets, determining game and puzzle difficulty. As it stands, all that changes between the 3 modes is how hard enemies hit Harry and how weak he hits them back. Standard affairs. Also for the time is tank controls. You youngins have it easy, I tell ya, as tank controls have gone the way of the dodo. As it sounds, pressing forward on the D-pad, yes, the D-pad, no analog stick, moves Harry forward, while pressing back does the opposite. Left and right don't move Harry in those directions, but instead turn him. This can take a bit of getting used to, as in the heat of combat, Harry bumbles a bit. Like anyone when dealing with a horror beyond human comprehension. Besides standard function keys that pull up the map unless you don't have one for an area and the status menu, Harry can also shimmy, run indefinitely, backstep, shift the camera to where he's looking, and most importantly, aim a weapon. Weapons selected from the status menu come in 2 varieties, melee and ranged. Amongst those 2 categories are differing power levels, so for melee weapons, it goes the knife, the pipe, the axe, and then the hammer. Guns are pistol, shotgun, and hunting rifle. Not to move away from them right now, but there are secret weapons unlocked in New Game Plus among other hidden goodies based on your results with the 10-star system. While melee weapons never run out of durability, you are opening yourself up to damage. While guns can deal with threats from a distance, they require ammo and Harry isn't a crack shot. See, the biggest difference gameplay-wise between Resident Evil and Silent Hill is that you can move while readying an attack with most weapons. The closer an enemy is to Harry, the more likely he will hit them with a gun, though each gun has different effective ranges. Enemies themselves are a wild bunch, mostly melee and grapple-oriented, but an aspect that merges them together is the finishing blow. Monsters don't die consistently when they drop to the floor. Now, sometimes based on what they were hit by, they will die after crumpling. More often than not, though, they will be placed into the down state, requiring Harry to hit them one last time either with his equipped weapon or a stomp to outright kill them. How can you tell when an enemy is still alive? By your handy-dandy broken radio. Picked up after the opener, the radio plays static in the presence of a monster. Your only way to determine how hot an area is and if a creature is still alive. You can turn it off, but that would be gimping yourself. Same with the flashlight, though it is context sensitive in that Harry only gains access to it when in a darkened area. The status menu, besides acting as an inventory screen, is one of the ways you can ascertain Harry's status, the other two with the rumble feature or by Harry's idle animation. Like Resident Evil, Silent Hill uses a color-based system. Green is good, orange is caution, red is danger. Dying in Silent Hill sends you back to the title screen, and while there is an option that says continue, it just loads your last save. Save often or not, that's up to you and what ranking you want to get. Healing items take the form of the health drinks, first aid kits, and ampule. Their efficacy listed out like the weapons before them. Structurally speaking, Silent Hill is a pseudo-open world as the town acts as a major hub between the points of interest Harry has to visit. Do not mistake my statement though, besides a few places, Silent Hill is barren. Most areas are locked off to Harry either by giant holes, which are the main obstacle to circumvent in the hub, or just not being accessible. Oh, and the roaming packs of monsters that want to kill Harry, they're there too. Generally within the hub, Harry has to solve either a simple fetch puzzle or witness a cutscene so they can go to the next dungeon. Unlike most horror protagonists, Harry does mark his map to help inform the player where to go next or where a puzzle element is. You might be wondering why I use such nomenclature for the actual levels, but dungeons best describe the locations Harry gets knee-deep in. Like with the Zelda series, there's almost always a main problem Harry has to solve in a dungeon, such as finding 2 amulets for the clock tower, or retrieving sets of keys to unlock doors. But besides those, there are legitimate riddles within Silent Hill, tasking you to use your noodle. Gameplay really doesn't change within the dungeons, just expect to check most doors and learn how almost all are jammed. This is why you want to pick up the map to a dungeon so you can keep track of what doors you can enter and which ones you can't. Dungeon sizes intermittent, Midwich and Alchemilla, 2 of the largest ones, while the rest being smaller. Sometimes Harry is also taken to the other world, but outside of increased enemy count and some changes in scenery, the other world isn't its own separate system. Going against the grain, not every dungeon ends with a boss, though more on those later as they aren't particularly great. Sometimes in dungeons or out in the town are optional items such as the newspapers or plastic bottle. If you want a greater understanding of Silent Hill the town or a chance for the best ending, do take heed. Yeah, like its major contemporary, Silent Hill has a number of endings, 5 in fact. Good plus good, bad plus bad, and the UFO ending available in New Game Plus. They're centered around completing the side quest and how you deal with Sybil, with what ending you get plays into the ranking at the end of the game. Finishing Silent Hill for the first time unlocks New Fear, I.E. New Game Plus, but completing the game with a set ranking, the highest being 10 stars, unlocks more. Let's just say to get everything out of the game, be prepared to scrape your nuts under an hour 30 with 1 or less saves and continues. My favorite aspect in this entire game is honestly fighting enemies. There's a song and dance to it that makes it horrifically fun to engage with. Per staying with the time period, let me compare the original Resident Evil with Silent Hill, as I'm going to make a defense for tank controls. Now, both games use the control system which you either love or hate. I will not deny that tank controls can take some time getting used to, but how it's implemented, at least for me, determines if I like them or not. For Resident Evil, I sort of dislike the reliance on tank controls. Hear me out. In the series, you play as officers, soldiers, people who've been through serious shit. On a story front, while unaccustomed to monstrous horrors, they have a training they can rely upon. Well, except for Leon in his first run with the franchise, as Raccoon City was his only day on the job. This character experience should transition over to gameplay, yet we get labored with admittedly awkward tank controls as if the people we're playing as have never been in a life or death situation. This issue is only exacerbated more come the later games, such as 3 Nemesis or Code Veronica. Jill, Claire, and Chris have already dealt with BOWs before, yet by keeping to tank controls, does it feel that they haven't learned from their experiences. Again, the next 2 times we play as Leon, it was 4 and 6, both games at least on the playing front showcasing how mature Leon has aged since his first outing. Before I continue, I'm not asking why Capcom kept to tank controls. It was probably the easiest thing they could do, it wasn't broken so they didn't need to fix it, and at the end of the day, my musings are fully philosophical. Contrasting Resident Evil's protagonists, most of the characters you play as in Silent Hill are average Joes, people who lack firearms training of any kind and are completely out of their gourd. Where Resident Evil suffers a disconnect between the style of gameplay and characterization, Silent Hill leans into that without missing a beat. You feel truly terrified to engage with the monsters as there's no knowledge you can rely upon. All you can do is flail and hope to come out on top. The awkwardness of the tank controls becomes a figurative enemy to deal with. When you're trapped in the corner against a gaggle of ghoulies, your mind's racing to fight out of the terrible spot you've been put into. Of course you'd bumble your way out, as seen with my battles with the Grey Children and Nurses. To emphasize this, not only is melee combat thrust upon you as powerful ammo is sparse, even in ranged combat you still have to let enemies move in. Back to Resident Evil, if a character was able to aim at an enemy, they would always hit them barring whatever stats on what gun you were using. With the handgun, you can reliably hit a zombie from across the screen even if you can't physically see it. Silent Hill, meanwhile, doesn't have that luxury. Just because Harry can aim at a foe doesn't mean he'll hit them 100% of the time. In fact, unless he's shoving the muzzle of the gun right down a monster's throat or he's using the hunting rifle, there are chances he will miss. This presents an interesting dilemma as now you have to factor in accuracy alongside threat level and number. For Midwich, I stayed using the pipe more often than not as the Grey Children generally attack in groups of 2, allowing me to bonk them over the head with, yes, some added risk, but it saved me handgun bullets for when I needed them. Each encounter has this mathematical formula attached to it, choosing whether to fight or flight, then if choosing fight, what option based on the attributes of what you are fighting. Some enemies you don't want to be close to, such as the Romper, while others only allow you to hit them if they are up close. Melee and ranged has their own advantages and disadvantages as well, with melee weapons forcing you into a brawl, but can have the potential to stunlock certain foes. The hammer is not to be underestimated, but groups of enemies can tear up Harry before he can take the upper hand as he has to time his swings properly. Whiffing can be a detriment that can lead to danger, thus for numerous foes, guns are a preferred choice, but now you have to deal with Harry's imperfect aim and counting shots. Wasting ammo is real easy to do in a panic, as even when monsters go into their knockdown state, you can still attack them for no gain. To complete this comparison, Resident Evil always has a threshold it crosses, the change from survival horror to horror action. There's always a moment in most of the classic games where you abandon your starter pistol, which is when you start maining the equivalent of the shotgun. 2 is probably the best example of this, as once in the labs, your main weapon becomes the shotgun or grenade launcher, and enemies lose their threatening aura. While this ingenious gameplay loop doesn't expand to the bosses, more in the next section, I won't deny that the best boss in the game is Sybil. Going for good plus obliges you not to kill her. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, she is suspect to her own rulings. The gun she gives you at the start is stated to have 15 shots in the clip. While I haven't counted while writing this, it is safe to assume that she can only fire 15 bullets before switching over to a grapple-focused game plan, thus allowing you to throw the remaining Aglophidus at her, provided you picked it up. Back then, that was unheard of, defeating a boss through a pacifist manner. Same goes for the final boss, though the way to do so is a bit more roundabout. If Harry has no ammo left on his person before he enters the arena, after 5 minutes have passed, the incubator/incubus will shove off this mortal coil. Why? Most definitely as a failsafe, but that's a clever way to circumvent an issue. You still have to survive within that time, but it is cool that you can beat the final boss without firing a single shot from a gun, as if building upon what Resident Evil had introduced with the fates of Barry, Rebecca, and Chris/Jill, Silent Hill 2 has its own pseudo side quest, but what makes it stand out more is that you have to go digging for it. Unnerving the power struggle within Silent Hill and Kaufman's role in it is never brought up to the player, unlike saving the other STARS members. You have to find out that certain locations around Silent Hill can be entered, so stumbling onto Kaufman in the bar mid-attack is quite a shock. So is following the breadcrumb trail leading to the motel in the secreted away Aglophidus. And again, never once is this brought up, and depending on your actions, you might not fully understand the events happening inside Silent Hill, as the newspapers you can read check to see if you read the previous issue. You can't skip papers, so if you didn't check the one out at the hospital, the one in the motel can't be examined. Shifting away from gameplay-related positives, the atmosphere of Silent Hill is palpable, and this game is damn near 25 years old. A lot of modern horror games wish they had the ambience of Silent Hill, with Akira Yamaoka flexing his dick at everyone by how he sets the tone. Visually, Silent Hill has that rustic small town vibe fit for a horror story, but you can tell something is off from the get-go. For a tourist spot, it feels as if Silent Hill has been long dead before Harry arrived. Coupled with that is the prevailing feeling that he doesn't belong. Not in the I'm just visiting sense, but as in Silent Hill is a secular town that doesn't take to outsiders. Being lost is a fear that a lot of people have. Not knowing where you are is scary, but what heightens that dread is when you know you're lost and the location you're lost in doesn't exactly want you to be there. Suddenly, your own misdirection is tag teaming you with the forces that be to create this vacuum of paranoia. Every tiny little sound, a threat possibly waiting in the wings, each bizarre growl from a monster, confirmation that you are more alone than you've ever been. And that's not even getting into the music, a harsh industrial mix that lulls you into a sense of insecurity. Did I say lulls? I mean bashes you over the head to such a degree that some rooms you won't want to stay in for longer than a few seconds. In certain levels, it's not that you are listening to music, but more or less being assaulted orally. But then when music isn't playing, it feels as if time stands still. The vacancy of sound plays on the mind, inferring a downward spiral of hysteria. For the longest time, Harry believes himself to be going mad, the sways and pulls of the soundtrack helping to solidify that concept. And to say little of the actual composed tracks of the game would be folly. While not my absolute favorite OST out of the series, 3 and 4 are locked in that death battle, especially since 4 has the character tracks of Room of Angel and Tender Sugar, while 3 has the upbeat You're Not Here and haunting Never Forgive Me, Never Forget Me. 1 has some phenomenal tracks such as the title track setting the scene for the experience with its rattling acoustic guitars and somber flow to Killing Time's darkly mysterious beats and incorporation of vinyl crackle. For a game OST which isn't always composed of straight music, as a lot of Silent Hill is made up of smaller ditties lasting no longer than a minute, making the most out of each track is a hard accomplishment to achieve. The lead up to battling Incubus has the track playing Until Death, which is only 52 seconds in length, but it's one of the most memorable tracks because of how pounding it is.
Quit screwing around. Return things to how they were before.
Kaufman!
Did I ask for this? Nobody uses me. You won't get away with this.
Your road is over. We don't need you anymore. What do you think you could accomplish by coming here?
My, aren't we getting cocky?
And if you think that the story and gameplay are integrated well enough, add the presentation to it. The theme for the Incubus, My Heaven, is a distorted mess of pitches and whines, as if Harry's radio is freaking out because of the presence of a godlike entity. There is precedence to this, as the radio generates different sounds depending on the number of enemies to help the player discern which ones are still alive.
Huh? What the?
I could go on and on with the multitude of facets this game has. The radio itself is a fantastic concept as it both alerts you to monsters but serves as a simple way to add to the cacophony of madness. It's both your best friend but a constant reminder of the world you've fallen into. Harry has idle stances and there's attention to detail with him, such as his breathing after running and his reactions to when close to death. Having Rumble turned on provides you a bit of tactile integration, as at low health your controller vibrates to tell you Harry is in danger. The opening sequence with Harry in the alleyway is an exquisite way to start a game, with the various angles heightening the trip into Wonderland aesthetic I'm reminded of. If there's one last thing I could say about this game is that it pushed the limits. If I had anything wrong with Silent Hill, it's honestly the two sewer sections, as they just aren't interesting. If the wonders of this game can't pull up a stinky concept to begin with, you know sewer levels are a lost cause. For starters, both sections are extremely short, requiring you to find keys to move forward. That is all there is to do, begging the question why even include these two moments within the game if they're going to be transitional at best. The antique shop sequence, while akin to the sewers as it serves as a transitory section between Hub 2 and 3, actually, did something with its setting. Second off, the enemies in the area aren't interesting on the creative front. You like cockroaches and shit monkeys? One's a minor annoyance seeing reusage, as the roaches were at the school, while the sewer simians, despite having a neat set piece where they chase you, are definitely the least interesting enemy in the game. They don't emit any peculiar noises nor come across as unnerving. It's as if they were plucked from a different game entirely, the orange clawed creatures in the same boat. Actually, there are not a lot of good enemies in this game. I speak for this on the design front, not a gameplay one. Besides the Grey Children and the nurses/doctors and two bosses, Splithead and the Incubator/Incubus, this cast of foes is kinda lame. Now, they aren't too generic so as to be forgettable, the flying bastards and ape-men sound design filling the streets of Silent Hill with dread, but visually, we are far from the heights of what this series would present. I will acknowledge that this is nitpicky, stacking up the originator against its successors. Chalk it up to the relative weirdness belonging to this first entry. Not all the rules have been set yet. Continuing with the enemies, they do lack in aggression at times. After attempting a grapple or attack, they mindlessly wander away for decidedly no reason, only to go back at you for another strike. Perhaps this was a foresight on Team Silent's part to make enemies not too overtly annoying? It does make it seem like the creatures of Silent Hill are just as annoyed when it comes to dealing with you as you are terrified of fighting them. Extending to the boss fights, can't be too critical, as this was still around the time that survival horror was piecing itself together, but do all of these bosses reek of shoot at it until the monster dies? I can give Splithead props for having a weak spot that can be exploited, but you don't really have to. As long as you have enough ammo for your stronger guns, which you should, as using the shotgun or hunting rifle on weaker foes is a stupid decision, and some health drinks, you can basically forego any strategy. The rest of my quibbles with Silent Hill are few and far between. Nowhere, while a fun final dungeon to slink around, is slightly aggravating to traverse since you never pick up a map. The sewers are even smaller than Nowhere, but they still provide you one, and you don't have to double back as much as you do with the named keys. Some of the puzzles can be a bit too dense for their own good. The piano puzzle has a special place in the hearts of the people who've played this game, mine included due to how poorly it relates the information needed to solve it. Assuming the broken keys as the birds in question is a bit of a stretch, seen as not all the keys are broken. All that really tips you off is that two birds are next together and two of them are black keys, which you'd only think that because two of the birds, the raven and the crow, are black. The astrology puzzle is downright impossible if you don't know anything about astrology and the numbers correlating to each star sign. Still, it could be worse, seeing as 3 has the Shakespearean puzzle, which is only for people who live, bleed, and die that playwright. This is another case of, do I have to tell you to play this game? Team Silent, despite everything going against them, brought to life one of the most imaginative and innovative entries into the survival horror genre that was only topped by their follow-up. If you call yourself a fan of horror and haven't played Silent Hill, you are doing yourself a disservice, as it is with this game that the survival horror genre was solidified into when it was perfected. Hey, 200 subscribers. That's pretty nice. If you're expecting a celebration, I'll save a big title for 1,000 to counteract my 100,000 goal. Perhaps something I've referenced before. A story that might be one of my all-time favorites, not counting Saya. Little food for thought, especially since how I'm going to cover that technical trilogy is going to be messy in more ways than one. But to not leave you empty-handed, perhaps a treat for 200. Perhaps a new hero. A new legend. Take that as your only hint as this showing of Silent Hill is over.